All right, so we're on the last section of hacker management. And so we covered before was that the most important thing to work on is yourself and how to look through these different things. So, how to be better with the business, how to work on your technical skills, how to do those different things that make you a better person to handle the management difficulties in the world. The second part was more along the lines of the team and how you can make sure the team is well situated and how we can move through the life cycle of how both yourself and your manager can work together to do some amazing stuff and the importance of kind of putting all those things together. So the final part of hacker management will be discussing the business or how we can better explain many of these things to executives. So we'll go right in here. All right. So how do we bring this back? So the first and most important thing is figuring out what to say. And so when you're speaking with executives, I think it's really important to realize you need to speak their language and keep it very simple. Simple is good. Talk about financials and concentrate on how those might be impacting something. And then if all else fails, remember that they like their jobs and you can go for some good old-fashioned FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Keeping everything very simple makes it a lot easier to kind of understand it all. And it seems kind of intuitive, but here's my good example I love talking about is one time I had to prepare a talk for an animal. And we spent hours getting everything together. Hours of my team working together to put together this presentation for only an hour long. So probably spent 40 hours for a team of 4 putting it together for just 1 hour discussion. And then suddenly the day comes and we're there and it's 5 minutes late. It's 10 minutes late. It's 15 minutes late and then the admiral comes inside. So we start on our presentation, we start going along, has a good pace, everything's going great, and 5 minutes into it, he has to leave. He has to go do something else. So everything we worked on did not go to an hour presentation. It went to a 5-minute presentation. And it needed to be concise enough and simple enough to get all that information to him in 5 minutes. Otherwise, the rest of that is just wasted. So be thinking about how you can do that so you can show the value of everything really upfront as quickly as possible and keep it simple enough and impactful enough to let them make some change and make decisions that impact the business. If you're not doing that, you need to go back and work on that. So one thing I usually like to talk about is how you're going up against people who are just like you. In many ways, criminal organizations have gone to this way where they are just as complex as you guys are. They're just have the same kind of mechanisms for development, promotion, and things along those lines. I think it's amazing the fact that you have people promote up where they kind of work into these better positions. And I think that level of sophistication where you think there's a 400-pound hacker in the basement, that's not really true. These are legitimate organizations that have a 9-to-5 job sometimes, or have working hours, have retirement plans. All those things all line together. And as soon as an executive understands that, I think that carries a lot more weight. They start to feel like, oh, I'm not just going up against this 400-pound hacker in the basement. I'm going up against a legitimate threat, someone who is very similar to me. I think that resonates a lot. So that Kaspersky report on that, I think, is very helpful. So let's talk about financials. So if you're in an organization, one of the parts of the culture is the words people use, the acronyms people use to make things kind of happen. And their understanding and partially their belief in that you know what you're talking about is if you're talking the same language, if you have the same kind of vocabulary. So with financials, executives understand these. If you become a CEO and you don't know what a 10K is, there's probably a little back and forth. So let's go through those real quick. So you have the 10K, which is the annual report. You have a 10Q, which is a quarterly report. And then you also have something called an 8K, which is unscheduled events. of something that would be of interest. And so this is something that people use, the company uses to tell investors, hey, this is why you should look into us. This is why you should care about what we do. And can help make you decisions whether we're doing a good job or not. So a lot of bonuses are paid off on these and those different things. So that's great because that's the language, everyone cares about. If those things are impacted, the executive's life is impacted. And the company's perception is impacted. So if you look at these, you can start seeing, hey, with the 10K, this company is losing money. This company had a bad quarter this year. And you can see that in these reports. You can also see something about where they're getting their money from. So if you're looking in certain applications or look at certain ways of moving around the organization and you're doing a pen test, don't go after the application that supports this side off business that doesn't make any money. Go after the applications that are in the most important parts of the business, where they make 50% of their income, where they're really under that pressure, because that's where they'll be more likely to listen to like pen test results, vulnerability reports, things along those lines. It's very unlikely they're going to chase money off for applications that are going out in the next few months or something along those lines. Much more likely if it's their core business model, right? And so you can see that from the 10Ks, 8Ks, or 10Ks and 10Qs. The 8Ks in particular are more of the events like if there was a breach, if they're closing down an operation, closing down a shop, something along those lines. Those kind of events would be put in there, or if a big wig is retiring or something along those lines. So these are really fun, especially for phishing, because you could go in and say, oh, okay, we know that this plant is closing down. We're going to send out a phishing email talking about how this plant is closing down. Or there's a new vice president they're hiring on. We're going to go find out something along those lines about that new initiative and what we can do. And find that person's name, start sending out things saying, hey, I'm XYZ, just came on, and then see a phishing thing go that route, and it'll be very topical. And also, obviously, the higher ups will pay a lot of attention to it because it's something that it's important enough that it impacts shareholders. So it's a good way to do a lot of the recon and understand what is important for the business, whether it's your own business or it's a business you're looking into. The two events I want to walk through this for is Target and Equifax, and how we can look at these different types of things. So Target's stock is kind of all over the place in this example. I think the example of stock prices being hit is not holding its weight. You can't really tell from this graph where Target was breached, right? You can see some dips and so you have some ideas, but you can't really tell right now because their stock's back up to where they were before. So that might be a bad indicator. It's something people easily understand where a stock price might drop, but it's not a good tell of the actual impact, perhaps. And so looking back into this, reading into their 2016 10K, you can see a lot of different year days. And you can look through this and see, hey, what looks very weird? What is the anomaly in this data? And it's kind of like looking at assembly code, and partly why I enjoy it. But in particular, you'll see something that is right here under the discontinued operations of a loss of 4,085. And that sounds bad until you realize that this is in the millions of dollars. So there's about $4 billion of discontinued operations that have occurred during this time. And it might be coincidence, but the breach happened at the end of 2013. So looking back on this, it appears that something major happened to the financials at this time. If you look into it a little bit further, and there you can see that loss there. you look into it a little further, you also see that compared with its peers, Target seems to be lagging behind everyone during this time. And again, it appears to happen because they're above Target around 2013 still. And then they dropped significantly for 2014 and then slowly made their kind of the rise back up. So it really opens up a lot of questions of why did this happen? And the most significant thing that popped to my mind, which might be purely coincidental, but I'm not sure about that, is that the cyber breach caused that. That loss of reputation caused that. And that's how we can see something from a 10K that shows lasting impacts way better than what we saw with the stock. And so let's do the same thing with Equifax. So we can see this hasn't happened that long ago. So you can see the major dip, and the stock hasn't come all the way back up. But they already made a small recovery and everything along those lines. And then, and I expect what we'll see over the next few years is they'll kind of even on out again. In fact, if you look at their 2017 10K and you look at these numbers, there really is not much of a change. In fact, they're doing a little bit better than they were doing before, than last year. In their 10K, they do have a statement about the breach and how that might impact things moving future on, but it doesn't seem to have the same impact that it happened with Target. And so we kind of asked the question, why is this? And because I'm coming up with kind of two possibilities, or perhaps three. One, it could be that this is nothing, and I'm reading way too far into it. But I don't think that's the case. Could also be that we just haven't waited long enough for Equifax to kind of come back with the actual numbers and the impact to their operations. I actually have seen news articles saying that Equifax was the most expensive cyber breach that has happened so far. So obviously there's something that's impacting its bottom line that we just haven't seen presented to us yet. And then finally, it could be that instead of just waiting for longer, it could just be that it's a completely different business model. The customers for Target are people like you and me. I can easily go vote with my feet if they decide to treat my data poorly, or they lose my data, or something happens to it. That is very different than what we can see with Equifax. I'm not their customer, really. I'm more of their information and the product they kind of build. The customer for Equifax is actually other companies, like coming back and asking for credit reports and things along those lines. So they probably don't have the same ability to walk away. They have NDAs in place. They have contracts set up in place. They have entire processes built around Equifax. And so they can't as easily shift off of that. And so I think that's causing perhaps a lag in this and that we don't see. And it could be that we see a much larger turnover later as these NDAs contracts slowly go away. Or it could also be that just nothing happens because of this, right? Companies might just not care that data was lost because they don't have a direct hit from that, or haven't opened themselves directly up the liability. It's going to be very interesting to see as everything kind of materializes around regulation of how this might change, right? And so I think that's very important to kind of think about and think through who's actually the customer, what are the actual impacts you'll see because of a breach, because we have two extremely powerful companies that have had breaches, and the impacts seem to be very different and how they would react to it. But I think one of the similarities is, of course, with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In both of these, there's the traction of people are being fired. These C-level executives had to be changed out and were changed out, right? And I think at the end of the day, sometimes that needs to also be said. You can show the numbers all the time, that logical side of it, but there's also that emotional appeal. The emotional, hey, you need to be aware of this because if something like that happens, you might be looking for work, right? So I think that's the last resort that I'd recommend you keeping in your back pocket. So we move through this really quickly, but let's talk about the review. So on the different levels. So if you are the tech expert where you're just trying to maintain your technicality and do a great job doing that, keep it simple. Try to think how you can keep everything as quick as possible. So if you go into that meeting with that executive and you have 5 minutes, it better be the first thing you say, and it better be memorable so that they can leave and make a decision based off of that 5 minutes. And then show your work. Show how you did for the rest of the time so that you can answer those questions. Less is more in a report. Don't worry about throwing all the data out. You're trying to help them make a decision. So the less information helps push towards that decision. And then find similar big name items. So if you are a retailer, go to Target. If you are a company services side, go to Equifax. There's lots of examples every single day of where something like this happened. And so what I found very, very helpful for context purposes is always saying, hey, this is what happened. This is where there's a concern. And this happened in a very similar manner to one of our peers or someone else, another big company that you know. That's why this is important. And this is why this has meaning. I feel that goes a lot farther. As the middle manager, of course, make sure your team's looking to have that bottom line up front, being that first 5 minutes. Edit out many, many more things. As you're closer to business, you have more of an idea of what is topical and what they're concerned about. If they're more concerned about a certain topic because of a breach, because of a shareholder meeting, because of something along those lines, make sure you lead with those things and reprioritize accordingly. And then get upwards feedbacks for the clarity of message. So you need that feedback at the end of the day. If you go in and you have a message and that is taken the completely different way than what you intended, you need to know that so you don't make that same mistake again. Otherwise, again, you're spinning your wheels where you're not. If you're not getting that feedback, you need to be making friends with the executives who are getting that feedback or who are able to say, yes, this makes sense. Yes, this is important. Yes, this is valuable. Or you need to leave that stuff off. You're just wasting your time, right? For the executives, orient efforts really closely to the business. Make sure that is always happening, being closer to the business, understanding more the people are looking for. That's extremely important. And so if you're concentrating on more on that side, make sure that information is getting down to help drive some of the other capabilities and work. And then understand the impacts from a strategy perspective, and especially if there is some remediation that might be political in nature or something that is delicate or a hot button issue, right? If you're saying some things that, or if the team are saying some things that are not well understood or not well taken, it might go a way that you don't want it to go. So I think it kind of wraps it all up. So we've again talked about, in part 1, we talked about the self and how to make yourself much better and how to bring in all these different development tools for that. We have talked about the team and how to make the team work better for helping develop that and do better things. And then finally, we talked about the business and how we communicate more effectively to executives and the different tips with that. So I'm going to leave the questions slide here. Since this isn't live this time, I'm going to go cut right on out. But if you have any questions or have anything you want to talk about next, I'm going to have links to the other videos. Please contact me, put it in a comment, shoot me an email. This is great, this is bad, whatever. I appreciate all the feedback. And I do appreciate everyone who has been encouraging me to come back and write all these things down so that we can help share this and move this conversation forward. Because I think getting more understanding and helping hackers understand how management tips and tricks of doing these things is going to let us continue to do really amazing stuff and do really interesting, fun things. So thanks again for watching. Have a good day.